about the concept of requiring that the ROP be submitted whenever an eviction proceeding is going through the court system. So this legislation, if passed and signed by Governor Cuomo, will require that a landlord submit a copy of the ROP when they begin the eviction proceedings. From a simple perspective, I've always said this as a former mayor. An ROP is best for the landlord, best for the tenant, and best for the community. Everybody agrees at point zero, this unit was ready for occupancy. In talking to the city, if this is signed into law, they will give more than advance notice, up to 90 days, to notify landlords of this responsibility in the rare occurrence that they didn't get the ROP. I find this to be a great tenant protection, and we thank Mayor Sheen for bringing it forward. And in conversations with the Conference of Mayors, we are looking to emulate this and make it a statewide bill next year. The next bill we call affectionately the Receivership Bill. This bill was sponsored by my colleague Senator Ryan, who's out in the Buffalo area. And interestingly enough, the bill's intention is already in effect in New York City. It's in effect in Rockland and Westchester County and Nassau and Suffolk County. In essence, what this bill does, and honestly, this doesn't happen very frequently, but when it is, it's very disruptive to tenants. The city will be citing a property owner for some life safety issues, some code issues, whatever it may be. And unfortunately, the landlord is non-responsive. It could be they are incapacitated, they're out of the country, or they're just belligerent and not responding to the city's request to fix the issues. If not addressed properly, those tenants potentially are going to be displaced, and their lives could be turned upside down. What this bill does, which makes it now statewide, is allows the city to either themselves or to designate a housing nonprofit of some sort to take over as the receiver of the property. By doing that, they will continue to collect the rents from the tenants and also use that money to make the repairs to the property. This is overseen by the courts. The judge follows it very closely, and at some point when the issues are signed off on by the local enforcement agency, the receivership will come to an end. The tenants move on, living their lives, not being interrupted, not being displaced, but at the same token, we're making sure that the building is in compliance, preventing further deterioration. The final bill is what we call the Vacant and Abandoned Commercial and Industrial Property Bill. Back in 2019, we were in the south end of Albany as we celebrated a bill that allowed the local government to take title to a residential vacant and abandoned property. This is a bill that I inherited from my predecessor, Ron Canestrari, when I started in 2013, and have been kind of languishing for the last 10 or 15 years because there was never really a clear definition of what a vacant and abandoned building was, and there wasn't really a clear process delineated on how a local government would claim title. We were fortunately able to nail that process down in 2019, and as long as this has been a long-standing issue and concern for the Conference of Mayors, we worked closely with Senator Cooney out of Rochester to pass this bill to make it statewide legislation that vacant and abandoned commercial industrial properties would now fall under this process. Over my left shoulder, you might notice a vacant and abandoned commercial industrial property. I would dare say, if this was in law 10 or 15 years ago, this would have been a great opportunity for a local government to follow a very closely delineated process to take title of their property and salvage it. Unfortunately now, the city, the county, and the taxpayers are looking at shouldering some significant costs irrespective of what the final outcome might be. So that's enough for me at this stage of the game. I'd like to ask the Dean of the Capital Region, our longtime Senator, Senator Neil Breslin, to come forward and share a couple thoughts with us. Senator Breslin.
Thank you very much. And let's have a salute to both the mayor and John McDonald for putting this together. It's a wonderful opportunity to make sure there's a level playing field and that justice prevails, obviously for the landlord and obviously for the tenant. And the bill that I'm co-sponsoring, I sponsor in the Senate and John in the Assembly, the bill that says the landlord has to come in, if he's trying to evict a tenant, with clean hands. And what I mean by that is he must produce certificates that say that he is compliant with all the rules and regulations subject to renting. And if he's not, the suit's not going to go anywhere. So it's a simple bill. It really puts some pressure on a landlord to make sure he's up to code, it does all the things properly, and it obviously protects the tenant, because the tenant is sometimes at a competitive disadvantage with the landlord because of their respective financial positions. So again, I salute John and I salute the mayor for a fine job, and it's a welcome relief, and next to tackle the building behind me. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Breslin. And next up is the City of Albany Mayor, Mayor Kathy Sheen.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Senator Breslin. This is really the culmination of a lot of hard work by a team at the city that is really focused on, as the Senator said, leveling the playing field. We've spent a tremendous amount of time working to ensure that we are combating blight in our city and focusing on creating quality housing for people at all income levels in our city. We've increased the penalties for not registering a building as vacant. We've shortened the time period for which an ROP is valid so that our inspectors get their eyes on these apartments more often to make sure that we're stopping problems before they start. And we also created, and I signed into law, a comprehensive package of legislation that holds landlords accountable when they allow their buildings to become blighted. It allows codes to step in and make those life safety repairs and then bill the landlord for that. And we are trying to do all that we can to reduce the number of demolitions in the city, but then also to reduce the number of people who find themselves out on the street because they are living in an apartment that is unsafe and unfit. It's one of the things that our code inspectors dread doing, but from time to time, in order to keep people safe, they must do it. And we have worked to put together a program that provides for housing for individuals who are displaced. We're doing all that we can to ensure that these disruptions do not result in someone losing their job, having their children lose time from school. Isn't that great to hear? All of the things that happen when low-income families have to deal with the disruption caused by a landlord that is not providing them with safe housing. And one of the great innovations that, and I have a dream team over there that I'm looking at that work on these issues every day, but one of the things that this dream team came up with was that, we are seeing evictions in buildings and apartment units that don't have an ROP. Imagine that. And so we created a law that requires that you have to have an ROP in order to proceed with an eviction proceeding. But that only works right now as the law is drafted once the eviction proceeding's already been filed, and then we rely on the judge to enforce that. What we want to have happen is we want an individual to have that ROP attached to that eviction proceeding at the time that they file. And if they don't have it, they can't file. What does that mean? Why does that matter? Because once an eviction proceeding is filed, it gets served on the tenant. And we have a lot of tenants who then just leave the apartment. All of the upheaval, all of the turmoil, all of the disruption that happens with an eviction proceeding starts right then and there. And it would only be when they got to court that they would learn that they had this affirmative defense of there is no ROP, so you can't evict me yet. And so we don't want the tenant to even have to deal with that disruption until the landlord does what they are legally required to do in order to collect that rent every month. It's fair, it's common sense, and I want to applaud the Assembly and the Senate for recognizing that we have to do better for people who are renting, for people who are trying their very best to stay in their apartments, for people who are dealing with landlords who oftentimes don't do what they're supposed to do. And so for those landlords out there, the overwhelming majority of whom are doing the right thing, this levels the playing field for you too. You're paying for the ROP. You're doing what you're supposed to do. You're repairing things in your apartment when our code inspectors show up. You're doing the right things by your tenants. We need for everyone to be on that playing field. So again, I want to commend our Assembly member and a good friend who is going to continue to be a good friend, even though very soon this is not going to be his district, but it will always be his district because he's a former mayor, he gets it. And so thank you, John McDonald, thank you, Senator Breslin, for your hard work and for moving this forward.
Thank you, Mayor. It was kind of good timing to have a train going by. We've had automobiles. If a plane comes through, everybody better duck, though. Be careful. And, you know, the mayor really characterized, I think, what all mayors struggle with on a regular basis. And it's interesting. It's usually individuals' private property that government tries not to get involved with, but the reality is the public expects you at some point when it becomes a nuisance in a trial to do something. And, you know, as a former mayor who spent 13 years in Cohoes, I had a very great, long-standing relationship then and still today with the New York State Conference of Mayors, which represents all the cities and villages throughout the state. And therefore, I'd like to ask Wade Beltramo, who is their general counsel, to share with us some thoughts. Wade?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Assemblymember McDonald, Senator Breslin for having us, and City of Albany, Kathy Sheen for hosting us this morning. The New York State Conference of Mayors is a not-for-profit association that represents over 550 of the state, city, and village governments. And we have been working for decades on the issue of dealing with tenant issues, residential property issues, and vacant abandoned property issues. They are a cancer on our communities, and this building is unfortunately just an example of one of thousands of abandoned properties in the state of New York that are blighting our communities, that are inhibiting the ability of local officials to redevelop their communities, to create quality communities, to create a thriving tax base. And unfortunately, when they're allowed to languish in an abandoned state, for too long, they get to such the point that they become impossible to save, and they become extremely costly to repair. And I think that's part of the challenge. What we're here right now with this building is that it would have been better to deal with decades ago, frankly, than here in 2022. And so I do want to speak briefly about the bills. I'll leave to the City of Albany their Albany-specific bill, although we are looking and interested in applying that and adopting that as a statewide piece of legislation. First, I want to talk about the bill that Assemblymember McDonald already mentioned, Assembly Bill 5337A and Senate 9470. And this would authorize local governments to commence special proceedings in court to take title to abandoned properties. Now, I can say that this is not the first option that they want to do, because taking title to something like this is expensive, and they need to have a plan in place, and it's not always the solution that they would want or need. But it is needed in many instances, and all too often we end up with situations where after years and decades, the properties which could have had a life at one point have to be demolished, and that's a challenge. That's a problem for the taxpayers. Who ends up paying for that? It's not the property owner. It's generally the taxpayer that ends up paying for that. And so this bill actually replicates an existing provision of law. Article 19A of the Real Property Actions and Proceedings Law has been on the books for decades, and it allows local governments to take title to abandoned residential property. This proposal would create a new article, Article 19C, that would allow municipalities to take title to abandoned industrial and commercial property. So we are supportive of that. The other piece of legislation I would like to talk about this morning is Assembly 3241. And again, all of these bills were sponsored by Assemblymember McDonald, who has been a great advocate and supporter of local officials and community revitalization. I can't thank him and his staff enough. This would authorize tenants and local officials to commence special proceedings to have basically an administrator appointed when their residential units are not being properly maintained by landlords. And again, as Assemblymember McDonald noted, this is already authorized in New York City, Nassau and Suffolk counties, Rockland and Westchester counties. We're just looking to expand this authority upstate so that upstate communities have this ability too, to petition a judge, to have an administrator assigned who would collect the rents and then make the necessary repairs. None of these bills are a panacea. Dealing with problem properties like this is very difficult, and it's a huge challenge. It's just one of the many tools that we need to help deal with these properties. I should note before I end here, I really need to thank a lot of people. The Senate and Assembly have been extremely helpful helping local governments over many years now, getting programs in place, funding as well to deal with community revitalization. We have gotten the land banks law adopted a decade ago, which is doing tremendous work across the state and here in the Capital District. We've gotten funding through the Restore New York program, again, from the Assembly and the Senate. And so I want to thank, on behalf of the Conference of Mayors and my Executive Director, Peter Baines, Assembly Speaker Hasty, and Senator Majority Leader Stuart Cousins for their leadership in getting this through. Obviously, Assemblymember McDonald and Senators Ryan and Cooney for supporting the legislation that I just talked about. We are very, very grateful for their help in our efforts in dealing with these problem properties. So thank you very much, Assemblymember.
Thank you, Wade. Coincidentally, the Empire Justice Center is actually located in the same building as the New York State Conference of Mayors. And more times than not, whenever we're discussing local government issues, particularly when it comes to residential property and commercial properties, there's always a concern about tenants. The Empire Justice Center is one of the strongest advocates statewide on representing the interests of the tenants. And I'd like to ask Kirsten Keefe to please come forward to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember McDonald, and for inviting us to speak today. So I really want to thank Assemblymember McDonald and Senator Breslin. You have always been strong advocates for our communities and for neighborhood stabilization and community stabilization, dealing with vacant and abandoned properties and blight in our neighborhoods. And I've always really appreciated your eye as well for the protections of homeowners and, in this case, of tenants. The provisions that have been passed by the Assembly and the Senate that we hope Governor Hochul will sign into law really do put the tenant forefront. They make sure that the landlords are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And one of the bills in particular provides added relief for tenants to make sure that landlords are maintaining safe and habitable properties that they can live in. It provides a special proceeding for tenants to initiate in court when a landlord is not maintaining a property. They can use the power of the court to help them rather than just withhold rent and be in a defensive position against the landlord. They can be in a more proactive position with the landlord and get the landlord to fix the problems in the property. So we really thank you for your leadership in this realm, and we hope Governor Hochul will sign these bills into law.
So last but truly not least is our County Executive, Dan Mccoy. Now, as many people may know but may not know, unfortunately when people don't pay their taxes, those liens get turned over to the county. And eventually as those properties start to fall into disrepair, those headaches fall over to the county. So therefore, Dan, we give you the last word since you're usually stuck dealing with it at the end of the pipe, all right?
I think you gave me the last word because I was late. And I do apologize. I was at a department head meeting. But I'm going to take Senator Breslin's advice. He told me just to wave. But I do want to say to the Mayor, Sheen to Assemblymember John McDonald, who was a mayor for 13 years, gets the pain that we're going through and all the mayors, and has done an extraordinary job. And Senator Breslin, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for getting this done. This is partnership behind me that gets the job done. You know, dealing with this building for the last 5 years, but really the last year in court, continue to be in court. Hopefully we'll take ownership in October. It's taken a lot, and these laws will help us close on a piece of property like this quicker. It helps us get back on the tax rolls where the county's not paying for the taxes, which is good for us. But more importantly, it gives to the vision that Mayor Sheen and her team have for the city of Albany, and especially for the Capital District. So I don't want to rehash what everyone said, because it was all said well, but it's not possible without Senator Breslin, Mayor Sheen, the Common Council to a degree, and Assemblymember John McDonald. And I do want to say, John, you will be missed. And now I'm going to have to deal with Assemblymember Fahey all the time, but you will be missed in the city, and I do want to say thank you.
Let's be very clear. Cohoes, Waterville, and Green Island is still in Albany County, just to be clear, all right? And Mayor Sheehan definitely is not going to lose my number, that's for damn sure. So I also want to just say also a thank you to the New York State Preservation League, J.D. Lorenzo. Preservation League, as you know, is into saving and protecting historic sites and historic buildings. They've been a great partner throughout this whole conversation. And in summary, this package of bills that will be going to Governor Hochul over the next month or so provides protections for tenants, provides protections for properties, but also protects the taxpayers, which I think is sometimes lost in this overall conversation. At this time, if there's any questions, we'd open it up. These bills were passed in both houses with great support on both sides of the aisle. I think that's an indicator that this is, yes, a local issue for Albany, but a local issue they're dealing with back home in their district. So I'm mildly confident. I have not had any mention about that. Okay, thank you very much.